Welcome back to the Branding Laboratory. I'm Devo, your host, and today we're going to be diving into the world of innovation and leadership, two of my favorite topics, and of course, this intersection of personal and professional growth. And if you've been listening for a while, or if you're new, this is a show where we're going to break down how individuals show up in a more raw form, no fluff, no nonsense, no pretense, just a real conversation with real leaders who are redefining how they show up in business and how they show up in life. And my takeaway, my hope is that in the process of doing this, you'll learn something about this individual and maybe be able to implement into your own life. And so today's guest is Nick Jain. He's the CEO of IdeaScale. It is one of the world's largest innovation SaaS companies. I think I should know what that is, but I don't know if I do. But what he's doing, he's helping global organizations like Pfizer, the US Postal Service, Doctors Without Borders, just to name a few, innovate better and faster, become more efficient and proficient. He's more than a tech CEO. He's been involved in a bunch of different things, multi-industry leader who has built and scaled multiple companies, trucking, men's fashion, software, just to name a few. And he's also a battle rap aficionado. Who knew? So we'll be able to have a couple conversations on that. He's a poker player, quite proficient, and he's a guy who currently is working his way through Moby Dick. Go figure. I literally just ordered mine last week on Amazon, a collector's edition of Moby Dick. So I can't wait to talk about that with him. So anyhow, he is an avid reader like me, so we should be able to share a few conversation pieces on that. So you already know that this conversation is going to be a little bit anything but surface level if the dude is reading Moby Dick. Anyway, what can you expect from today's show? What do I hope that you get from this? I really want to explore the mind of an innovator and learn how Nick has successfully led in a bunch of different industries and the philosophies that drive him, how he shows up as a leader, how he understands this idea, this intersection of personal growth and this professional success, and how those two sort of are commingled and you can't do one without the other. And by the end of the conversation, it's my hope that you'll walk away with some new insights on how to embrace change, how to innovate, how to challenge the status quo, and think like an innovator, think like a leader, regardless of your industry or your experience level. So settle in, hit the like button, follow, share, whatever it is you do to get this message out, and let's get into it. We did it, man.
Hey, I'm glad we managed to finally coordinate after numerous mishaps and scheduling issues on both sides.
I don't know if they were both sides, bro. I think they were mostly me. But anyway, thank you for your patience.
No, I appreciate it. No, I had one. I think it was like last week. Either my internet was down either last week or the week before when we tried to schedule it.
I don't even know. There's some weirdness was going on. I know I had a couple of technical outages. There was just bad scheduling. I was in the middle of a producer change. There was just always like little things. But I appreciate your patience, and I'm excited to have a conversation with you. So thank you for joining the show
Likewise.
today.
Thank you so much.
So I think a little bit about the show, the format, just a conversation, man. I just really want to get to know you. The whole idea is to you can drop a few morsels of wisdom or insights on your journey and your beliefs and how you show up personally and professionally. Most of my listeners are entrepreneurs, so they're always looking for ways to like up their advantage on things. So any hacks, tips, insights, that's really the point of the show. We're going to dive into your origin story, learn a little bit about what you're doing right now and how you got there, and then go down the rabbit hole from there.
Perfect. One quick tactical question. Anything I can do in either the way I present things or the types of things that I talk about that would be most useful to your audience?
Thank you for asking that. Very thoughtful. I don't know. I think just be you first and foremost. It's a conversation, not an interview. If you have questions for
Yeah.
me, just imagine we're sitting having coffee or tea or a beer or whatever your beverage is, and then probably not overly technical. It sounds like you've got a pretty nuanced mind and a bunch of different trajectories and directions. And then not a lot of don't go too far into like monologues. Just so like we're having a conversation, I guess I would say, because I will don't think ill of me, but I will cut it off if it starts going too long because I want to. There's a bunch of different things that I want to get into.
Yeah, no offense will be taken. I'm not usually long-winded, but no offense will be taken if you cut me off.
Yeah, I can't say the same about myself. So if I start rambling, cut me off. You have full permission. Anyhow,
Perfect.
let's jump into this. So I do the intros and the outros and all that stuff after the show. I like to see the vibe of the conversation, and I just do it from that perspective. Let's just jump into it. So one of the things that, and thank you for your bio. I imagine it's probably quite a bit more lengthy than what you put in there. So I'm assuming you're just a really humble person, but you have a pretty experienced story of where you've been from industries you've worked in, trucking, poker player, battle rap dude. I love that. And also,
Only as a listener, not a performer. I tried once and was just abhorred at it.
you'll love this story. When I was in college, I went to a very wealthy white school. I was on a football scholarship, so don't judge there. But there was like the whole idea of college is like to bring in cultural things, and especially at white
Yeah.
colleges, they make it like this big deal. Make sure they're bringing in the colored people from outside the campus to show how diverse they are. So every once a month, they would bring in these from a university that was like in an urban part of the state. They
Mhm.
would bring in these battle rappers to do freestyle contests to expose this literally like completely white audience to it. But I grew up in like total color, like very minority. I was the minority where I grew up. So I've always into rap. I was always into this sort of my urban thing. I still don't know why I went to this college, by the way. That's a different conversation. But anyhow, one day they had one of these rap contests, and I was like, I can do this. I'm gonna get up there and try it, bro. I completely made a fool of myself. I was like, all right, I'm just as white as the rest of these people here. I suck at this,
You know,
but
some of the top rappers are, in fact, I think three of the top guys right now. One's Arabic, one's white Jewish, and one's like an Indian guy with a turban right now. Three of the top five are not traditionally from rapping communities. So
well, I'm not making this a racial thing. So those of you who are listening, this has nothing to do with race. It's just that traditionally, and I think I'm probably older than you. When I grew up, I graduated, so I was in college in 1995, 94, my age now.
Mhm.
And most of the people who were rapping in those days were just African Americans who like they brought the rap game into the space. For me to get up on stage was quite an anomaly. But anyhow, I really appreciated what I was reading. I was like, wait, battle rap? That's cool. So anyhow, all right, let's talk a little bit about you. Um, you seem like a mover shaker, industry innovator, things of that nature. So I imagine you're not one of those type of people that just follows the status quo. Have you always been that way? Were you raised that way? Were your parents that way? Like a little, just tell me a little bit about you and your upbringing and how you got to this space.
Sure. So, look, I come from a very typical immigrant background. My parents immigrated here from to Canada from in the 1980s. Typical immigrants, shirt on your back, started their careers at McDonald's, worked their way up. My father got a good union job as a janitor, but that's what he did for 50 years, right? Solid blue collar job, good pay, but certainly not on a corporate trajectory. My mother worked in a kind of bluish white collar field for the government. So I think what I inherited from them was certainly like the immigrant hustle, like when you don't have a lot of resources, you figure out how to feed your family, how to get a house, and they build and save, right? And I think long term. So I don't know if my parents created this tremendous foundation of like stability, allowing me to invest in my education, but also this value of you got to hustle, you have to think long term, you have to be able to be self-sustaining. And what that's created is a certain amount of scrappiness that I've brought to each level of whether my educational or my professional career. At IdeaScale, where I am right now, for example, we're a bootstrapped company. So you always hear about all these phenomenal technology companies that have raised $100 million, $1 billion, whatever capital that then they throw at marketing campaigns or people. At IdeaScale, and credit, by the way, to my predecessor, Rob, who founded and ran the company for the first 10 years, we did it entirely bootstrapped. So we've built a global company with major customers like Pfizer's and Comcast and US Post Office without a single dollar of outside capital. And when I was brought in as external CEO about 2.5 years ago, and I've continued to bring that level of mentality that we're going to do a lot, accomplish a lot with very little relative to many of the folks we compete against in the market.
How have you raised that kind of capital without taking anything outside investment? Can I ask that question?
Yeah. So again, I really want to credit the first 10 years to Rob, my predecessor, who founded the company. I think it was two things. Number one is be very thoughtful about not spending money you don't have. A lot of organizations, they have these grand ambitions, but they're out there spending money that they don't have. And we've always been cognizant, what do we have to work with? Those are hard boundaries because our founders don't want to take external capital. So that was a hard boundary. We just said, we've got $100 in the bank. That's all we can spend. We can't make plans for spending 500 or 1,000 or $1 million. Number two is, and this is something I've especially brought to IdeaScale, is being cognizant of of ROI positive investing. So a lot of companies, when they spend a dollar, they don't think about how am I going to get more than a dollar out. Any good investor, any good business executive knows if I'm spending $100, I need to get more than $100 out. I need to make a profit. I need to make a return on my investment. And so at IdeaScale, we've done that consistently, both under Rob's leadership as well as mine, where today, when we make a decision to spend on a marketing campaign, a new person, a new product, we're always very cognizant, is this going to allow us to continuously grow and compound our success?
So this idea of continuously grow, you've heard the adage, you have to spend money to make money. But if you don't have money, how are you being innovative in the marketing space? Can you maybe walk me through some of the innovative tactics, strategies that you've put in place if you didn't have the funds to necessarily fund it?
Yeah, so today, by the way, we're very profitable, right? So we are generating profits that we then put back into the business.
Hmm.
I'll give an example for marketing. So when I joined 2.5 years ago, we had zero marketing personnel at all. Okay. I think we were running a small LinkedIn advertising campaign. We were profitable, but we weren't spending anything on marketing. And we didn't really know how to do marketing. We eventually built a small marketing team, but we didn't have someone dedicated to social media. And then there's something really cool happened. So ChatGPT came out, what, a year and a half ago now. And I'm sitting in a bar in Amsterdam waiting for my wife to come down. I think she was changing, and I'm sitting having a pizza and a beer. And I said, we don't have a social media marketing person. We don't have a social media presence. Let's see if I can try out this new tool, ChatGPT, to build an entire social media presence for us. So me, not being a social media marketing expert, not being a marketing expert, sitting there with pizza and a beer in about an hour in a bar, was able to build an entire social media marketing campaign that extended out 6 or 7 months. You know, what would have taken historically maybe a full-time employee, like a year doing that continuously. And it resulted in a really tremendous increase. Over the course of that campaign, I think we went from seventh in media followership in our space to first, or sorry, to second, and then took another 6 months for us to get to first. And that's an area where, again, with very little resources, me, 1 hour, not an expert in this field, was able to take some tools such as ChatGPT and then drive a lot of marketing outcomes that normally would have required a much more well-resourced team.
Hmm. So you use ChatGPT to build a content strategy in terms of.
Exact content strategy, but also the actual posts. So today we've gotten much more sophisticated on it, but that initial attempt, what I did was I built out an entire calendar of what we want to post. So those could be day specific things such as for National Arbor Day or for XYZ Heritage Month, but then also relevant content to IdeaScale, but then also optimized. I was one of the early people who started using these generative AI tools to optimize content. So I may write an organic post myself, but then I ask ChatGPT to optimize it for SEO or for this particular context. So to summarize, basically ChatGPT wrote out the schedule for me, it wrote out the content, and then it also optimized the content so that is maximally placed for best SEO, best user engagement, etc.
Do you ever worry that by going that approach, and I'm not making a judgment, I just don't know the answer to this. I hear different people say different things. Do you ever worry that you're losing some of the critical thought aspect of that by going that route?
So yes and no, right? So when we've used an entirely automated, today we've stepped back from doing all automated, and it's about 90% AI led. But when we were running 100% AI led, we noticed a few things. Number one, ChatGPT would make awkward posts, right, that are either inappropriate or politically insensitive, and that was bad. Number two was um, we lose some context about what's happening at the company today. So if I scheduled all of my posts for the next year using ChatGPT, it's not going to know about the product that we invented 6 months from now or the feature that we invent 6 months from
Mhm.
now. So we did have that. But then to counterbalance those two weaknesses of generative AI based content, it's will any human being do better than that? Human beings make mistakes, either unintentional or awkward, or you may be pissed off at your boss. And if you're the social media manager, you can write a horrific thing about your company. You've seen all sorts of debacles of quitting employees, posting
Yeah.
horrible things about their employers. So the question was not, are we losing something? But rather, by using generative AI, but rather, are these generative AI tools on average better than the majority of what a human being would do? And I'm not talking about the world's best single social media manager that's savant, but rather 90% of employees are not savants, are not geniuses, right? And generative AI needs to be able to perform at kind of that 90th percentile in any context, whether it be marketing, whether it be engineering, etc.
Hmm. Well, a fantastic story because I think a lot of people are starting to figure that out. But one of the things I've noticed, and again, this is just an observation, is that a lot of people's dialogue because they're all using the same generative tool, it's all starting to sound the same. So how do you, now that you're doing it less
Yeah.
AI, how are you finding that human edge so that you can stand out in this giant sea of eyeballs that basically everyone's posting the same stuff?
So I think we did two things, and I'll give a personal example and then a company example. For a personal example, I have trained for some of my personal social media posts or personal blog posts, I have trained generative AI to speak in Nick's voice. I spent a
Mm,
lot of time, probably like a day, gave it hundreds of articles that I had manually written over the past few decades or decade to train it in my voice, to train it speaking the way I do. So I'm very casual in terms of the language I use, but at the same time, I'm extremely structured. I like, if you ever see an email from me, it'll be bulleted, it'll have
mm,
proper text, it'll never use abbreviations like THX. That's just
mm,
my writing style, for better or worse.
mhm,
So I spend a lot of time training generative AI to speak in Nick's voice, which is a distinct voice from, let's say, Devo's voice or
mm,
John's voice or Madeline's voice. And that's number one. On a company for and that has resulted in more authentic content. In addition, I'm obviously making sure that generative AI is writing about stuff I care about. I care a lot about poker. Generative AI will help me write content ideas about poker or posts about poker. It won't help me write a lot about modern art because A, I don't know a lot about modern art. B, it's not inauthentic for me to be speaking about modern art. And then on a company level, I think we've done that in a slightly different way where the actual calendar and content is generated by human beings, but then we have used generative AI mostly for the optimization element at this point
got it.
to avoid that kind of repetitiveness. And I think the generative AI has done an extraordinarily good job of optimizing content that is human led, but then machine optimized. That
Mm,
allows us to be a little bit different than many of our peers.
got it. I want to switch gears because you've worked across several different platforms and industries, and I saw trucking, I saw software. There was something else in your
Shoes and
shoes.
and
That's right, and men's fashion. That's right, men's fashion. So I'm assuming you're well dressed. Looks I can't really see, but it looks like you have a nice sweater on. I love men's fashion and just think it's fantastic to understand that space. But it's a constantly changing industry, as is all of them. What would you say in terms of the common thread has been in your style of leadership across all these different types of industries with so much diversity?
I think there's three things that remain consistent about me and my style of leadership. Number one, I'm very analytics and data driven. I'm trained as a mathematician and physicist. My brain is hardwired to think in terms of numbers. I convert everything to numbers. I like having metrics. So each company I join, I make sure we create metrics for what matters to the business. We track them and we hold people accountable to those metrics, myself included. Second is transparency. I like a company and a culture where everyone can be honest. Like at the trucking company, I made it very clear to everyone in all of our warehouse, this is physical trucking with real goods. There's real
Mm,
potentially dangerous stuff happening. I made it clear as the CFO of that company, if any safety concern happens, doesn't matter what time of day it is or night, doesn't matter whose fault it is, let me know. And that meant that some junior warehouse hourly worker sitting in Chicago while I'm sitting in New York could call me up at 11 p.m. at night. This is a real instance and say, hey, a forklift hit a rack, we need to, no one's hurt, but this could fall down and kill someone. So that in a lot of companies, people are afraid to say that, right? Because, oh, whose fault it is, someone's going to get fired because the $100,000 damage. It's more important that you don't kill someone. And that transparency can be used in lower stress contexts as well. At IdeaScale, if I propose a bad idea, every employee is comfortable saying, Nick, that's a stupid idea. We shouldn't do this for XYZ reasons. Doesn't matter that I'm the CEO. We're trying to reach the right answer together.
mm.
And then third is stating what the goals are very clearly for an organization, right? Is our goal to create a product? Is our goal to sell stuff? Is our goal to be profitable? Is our goal to help our customers in XYZ fashion? I think stating a uniform goal that people are aligned around allows everyone to row in the same direction. And a lot of organizations, I think, don't state that goal explicitly, right? I think at IdeaScale and not just at IdeaScale, across all of the organizations, I think I've been very clear in stating, here's the direction I want the organization to head. This is a clear mission statement. Let's all align around how we achieve that mission together.
So analytics, transparency, and goal oriented. If you had to drop one of those and take only two of those assets into your next opportunity, which one of those three would you drop?
I think I would, this is going to sound awkward, but I think I drop transparency because I think the other two will at least lead to accountability and uniform direction.
Hmm. Those are three good assets. Do you think that those are part of your philosophical beliefs around what leadership looks like? Being clearly and not necessarily in those terms, but clearly informed. So that's where I get analytics, having the information in front of you as opposed to just like shooting from the hip. Transparency, this honesty, this integrity, this sort of leading with integrity. And then the third one is being very focused on what our opportunity looks like at the end of this. So I guess I'm reverse engineering the question. If you had to define what leadership means to you, does it include those three metrics or is it something different?
I think the latter two, namely transparency and being goal oriented, is part philosophically what I believe in as a leader. I think the metrics or information based approach is more less about me as a leader and me as a person. That's the way my brain is hardwired. I would argue that any leader should have those latter two characteristics as part of their style. The former really depends on the individual and how their brain works.
Anything else that you would add to that in terms of what leadership means to you?
A lot of fuzzy statement. I think it's underappreciated, but leadership means not doing everything yourself, but being able to rally or motivate people to do that. And that you can motivate people in a lot of ways. You can motivate them through money, through a grand vision, through charisma,
Hmm.
and different leaders do that through different ways. And I think an effective leader needs to be able to motivate a grand cadre of people around himself or herself.
Hmm. I love that you said that because one of my purviews on leadership is that you also sometimes are not always in the front position. You're not always, you're leading, but you're not always leading in the capacity where you're front and center. Sometimes you have to take the back seat and let other people drive, and you just serve as catalyst or a motivator or an inspirator, that sorts of things. I imagine with your career and the things that you've done, because I love what you said about that immigrant hustle. It's not just immigrant. I'm not an immigrant. Let me tell you, I think it has a lot to do with just not having a lot of opportunities when you were younger. I come from a very poor background, and I just remember thinking, I am no way in hell when I am in my father's position am I going to be in this space. And so I did everything I possibly could to figure out my hustle. So that immigrant hustle, the poverty hustle, whatever you want to call that, I really love that, what you said about that. Anyhow, back to the leadership space. You have, from what I can tell so far in talking with you, you've always been in some sort of a leadership capacity, I would imagine. Was there a pivotal moment when you were growing up, whether it was as a child or earlier in your career, that made you realize that you wanted to be a leader, you wanted to lead teams, you wanted to lead organizations rather than just being a cog in the wheel?
Yeah, it wouldn't be during childhood. I did have a pivotal moment in college. So for most of my childhood and my college career, I wanted to be a research scientist, right? I was studying physics and math, and I still love that today. That's what my degree's in. But then I actually went and did a research internship in physics, and I loved what I was doing, right? We were designing basically ways to detect these little tiny radioactive particles. Actually, not radioactive, but super tiny particles called neutrinos. They're the opposite of radioactive, actually, that are really hard to detect. And that was really fun, but it was an incredibly lonely job, right? I'm sitting there programming on a computer and then building these physical experiments. And I love the analytical part of it, but I realized I wanted to work with people. And my greatest skill in that respect was I could see the vision and get people to do things in an effective, coordinated way. So that was really, I spent 4 months doing this. I loved the job. I learned a lot, but it also made me realize a lot about myself that I don't think I could be a kind of independent contributor, a lone scientist, even though I loved the science part of it and the math part of it. I actually wanted to be more working with a team throughout my career.
Mm. In the collaborative capacity.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm imagining with a name like IdeaScale and what you've done with this business so far that you have a different way of looking at the world because we've talked about innovation and things of that nature. And innovation isn't just about technology. It's about people. It's about places. It's about things. It's about products. It's about how you lead. It's about how you follow. Innovation is like a variety of different ways. It's how you think. Is there a specific belief or philosophy that guides how you view innovation?
I'll say two things about that. Number one, I'd say innovation is essential. And you can think about it as innovation is exciting, or conversely, you can think about it as, hey, if you're not innovating, remember the guy or gal across the street certainly is. Your competitor's certainly innovating. The world doesn't stand still. So, number one, innovation is essential because the world doesn't stand still. Number two is for anyone, for any organization to become and remain innovative, they need three things. Number one, they need the right people. Number two, they need the right incentives. And number three, they need the right tools or technology, what I call PIT, people, incentives, technology. And if you're missing any one of those three elements, your organization is not going to be effective, right? For as a silly example, imagine you take Nick, pretty well motivated, hungry guy, knows nothing about art, right? If you put me in a company that is focused on altering modern art, Doesn't matter what incentives you give me, I'm probably not going to be successful and develop more innovative things there because I know nothing about art. I don't really care about it that much. So you need all three of those things. And similarly, you can have the greatest person and the most intelligent individual in the world, but if you give them terrible incentives, they're not going to do anything, right? If you pay them $0 and say, every time you come out and raise your hand, I'm going to slap you, they're probably not going to be super effective. And I give that as a silly example, but organizations figuratively do that all the time, where they take some of their best employees and slap them every time they come up with a good idea, because the marching orders of a lot of organizations is put your head down and go do
Mm.
your job.
Yeah, I have two stories like that as well. I consider myself relatively innovative, and I had a couple of ways early on in my corporate experience to change the way a process was working. They were very outdated, and I literally was slapped on the wrist, metaphorically, and told that it wasn't my place to bring ideas up. I had to follow a chain of command and fill out forms and go through my boss and go through my boss's boss. And I was like, dude, this will literally, and I had done the numbers on it, like this will literally change the game overnight. And people are like, nope, it's just not the protocol. We don't do things that way. So I really appreciate that perspective. How do you find that you said the right people? How do you find the right people when you're hiring, when you're looking for people to fill positions? And every business is different, right? But I'm just looking at from your perspective. How do you, because you mentioned, you literally said the word, the right people. Who are the right people for you? And what do you look for when you're hiring people or bringing people into the space?
The right people obviously depends on the context, as you just alluded to. The right people for IdeaScale are not necessarily the right person for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Hmm.
We're going to the Super Bowl this weekend, so a quick name drop. The 300-pounder you need for the Philadelphia Eagles is probably not the same relevant right skill set for a
Hmm.
software technology company. So the right people in our context obviously depends on which team you're looking for, but I'll state a few attributes that are important. Number one, for us, in our specific context, we need someone who can work multifunctionally, who can talk to an engineer, who can talk to product, who can talk to marketing, who can talk to sales, someone who is excited about understanding that in a medium-sized or small-sized organization like us, you need to be able to talk to everyone. We're 100 people across 8 countries. If you are just focused on your little role and you're not talking to other people, you're not going to be effective, especially in a distributed organization. Number two, someone who's out there learning new skills. And this is particularly important for today. Over the past, one of the few things that I've made a hard rule at IdeaScale, almost nothing I do is by edict. One of the few things I said was, if you're not using generative AI and learning new generative AI tools, you probably don't have a job here in a year. And so I made that mandatory for every person, whether you're sitting in marketing, whether you're sitting in engineering, whether you're sitting in product, to adopt these tools. And so that is something we're really looking for, someone who's actively going out on their own time, their evenings, their weekends, and learning new skills. And this is me too. I spent probably 10 to 20 hours every single week outside of work hours learning new skills because I need to stay ahead of the game.
Hmm.
And number three, somebody who thinks analytically, because creativity is not just coming up with a good idea or not just coming up with ideas, but it's the ability to assess which ideas are trash versus good, because not all ideas are good ideas. And we want someone who's coming up with ideas, but is able to think critically, are these good ideas? Are these bad ideas? What are the risks of these ideas? Because not all ideas are good, and it's okay to discard ideas along the way. That's a natural part of the creative process.
Is there a metric within IdeaScale itself that shows what a good idea is, or is that more of a subjective reasoning that you're asking these individuals to come up with?
I'm a mathematical guy. It is not subjective. We use what's called ROI, return on investment. That's the way theoretically any well-run company should be to run. And that we've made it very easy for whether it be an engineer, whether it be a marketer to figure out, is the return on investment of their idea positive or negative? As a silly example, on our own website, we've got an ROI calculator where anybody can go in and say, hey, does buying IdeaScale make sense for me? Does it make sense? Am I going to get enough return paying tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars for IdeaScale to make it worth it for my organization? And for some organizations, it doesn't make sense to pay for our software. For many others, it does. And that's also how we make decisions individually at IdeaScale. Any individual is empowered and given the right tools that they can figure out reasonably quickly with a few assumptions. Are their ideas good for the organization and its mission?
Are there any opportunities that don't necessarily have a measurable ROI in terms of analytical numbers, but have more esoteric long-term growth opportunities that you ever take a look at?
I'm going to answer in kind of a both philosophical and tactical way. I philosophically believe if it can't be measured, it doesn't exist in the real world. Okay? And then you may come back to me and say, Nick, what about love? Love exists. Love can actually be measured, right? We can measure love in the way your blood pressure rises or your face gets flushed or whatever, right? When you see your spouse or significant other. Um, so that's philosophically, I don't believe that if something cannot be measured, it fundamentally doesn't exist. And that comes from my kind of science training. Everything
Doesn't
can be measured.
exist or doesn't add value?
Doesn't exist. If it can't be measured, it's not real. Like, how do you observe it? You have to be able to measure it. You can't, it's like seeing is believing. If someone tells you there's a giant purple whale out in space, if you see it, great, you just measured it. You measured photons coming into your eyes. If you can't see it, it's not real. The second is, I believe that everything, even these long-term esoteric things, they can be quantified. It requires effort, right? If I'm inventing a new product that won't come out for another 5 or 10 years, people may say, Nick, just trust me on gut. It's going to be the greatest thing ever. But no, we can put some boundaries along what it could be 5 years from now, right? We can say, look, there's 6 billion people in the world, or 7 billion now, I guess. You can't, if your model or your beliefs about the world require there to be 25 billion people in the world in 5 years, it's probably a bad idea. So even some of these long-term complex things, if you put enough thought and use some careful assumptions, you can actually get pretty good estimates of what's going to happen, or at least balance, right? You may not be able to get an estimate, but you can say it's between these two goalposts.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a little bit more on this because assumptions at the very core are not real. Those aren't data driven. Those are just you making an assumption based upon a set of data points or deliverables or context or learned behaviors that you have. So things like trust or intuition or sort of gut feelings, those don't add any value in that space. And these, I'm just interrogatively
Yeah,
asking. I'm not
sure.
arguing for that.
Yeah. So assumptions, good assumptions aren't made totally out of the air. They're based on data that you have before. And that data can be stuff you, Devo, or I, Nick, have experienced over our careers. If I have seen a horse run 100 times in my career, I can say a horse probably runs at 40 miles an hour, right? That's a
Hmm.
good base case assumption. Now, we may have come up with a super horse that runs at 100 miles an hour, but that's a new thing we'd have to test out. So assumptions are okay to make. In fact, we make lots of assumptions in our decision-making process, but usually assumptions have to come from two areas. Number one, they have to come from the realm of possibility. If I told you we figured out a horse that runs 1,000,000 miles an hour, you should say that's BS, Nick. Secondly, they have to be based on some sort of data, and that data can be qualitative from someone's experience or intuition, because very rarely is someone's intuition totally made up. Your intuition is in some ways your brain quantifying all the experiences you've had over the course of your life.
Mm, interesting.
People don't make totally gut feel assumptions, right? That's a bad assumption. Assumptions based on intuition is okay as long as intuition itself is informed by experience.
Hmm, interesting. Where do you, okay, so then let's take the polar opposite of that. Where do you sit with fear and as it pertains to decision making? Because it seems like you thrive on this idea of change and innovation. So I would imagine risk taking and fear doesn't play into a lot of your equations.
Sure. At a human level, fear does affect me, right? I play a lot of poker. When I'm about to make a decision, a big decision, I do feel the emotion of fear. But fear is different from not from taking risks or not taking risks. So imagine you're about to buy a lottery ticket that costs $1. Chances are you're not going to win the lottery, but if there's $1 trillion payoff, it is okay to take that risk, right? So the way we think about risk at IdeaScale, and I think about it in my personal life, is okay, analytically, does the amount of risk that I'm taking, is it worth it relative to the reward I could get if things go right? And it's okay. There's lots of risks we take. When we run a marketing campaign, 9 times out of 10, it sucks. But the
Hmm.
1 time out of 10 it works, that could be 100xer for us, our organization, our business. So that's good. And the
Hmm.
same applies to my personal life. I may emotionally feel fear, but that, assuming I'm being rational, which I try to be, shouldn't prevent me from taking risks, including some big risks if the payoff is big enough.
Have you ever taken risks that you qualitatively had assessed prior, but the results did not match what you expected?
Yeah,
When is
yeah,
all your when ha, I'm just has there
yeah.
ever been a moment when your data and your analytics have not proven to be true, and what was that sort of outcome and how did you pivot off of
Yeah.
that?
I'll give two examples, right? One is when the outcome was bad but didn't it was within my model. So I started an asset manager, a hedge fund, where basically my math said, look, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance this will work. If it does well, it'll be a trillion or $1 billion business. There's a 999 out of 1,000 chance that it doesn't work. And it didn't work out. So it failed. I failed, but that was the expected value because I knew that 99.9% of the time I was fail, and that was a big risk I took from a career and financial perspective. In that case, it was the expected outcome was failure, and that was okay because the payoff was so big. Now let's compare that to a situation where our ingoing assumptions were incorrect. So we ran a marketing campaign in a IdeaScale about 3-4 months ago on LinkedIn. We wanted to, and we had some assumptions about the world that, hey, here's what the conversion rates are going to be. And we were wildly off by a factor of 10x. In that case, we had taken a calculated risk expecting failure, but we had mischaracterized or used the wrong set of assumptions going in on what are the range of outcomes that could happen here, right? The good news is we didn't take such a big swing that it would damage the company or really cause any real long-term effects, but our ingoing assumptions were wildly off. And thankfully, we learned from that experience and are going to be a little bit better at doing it next time.
Hmm. So for people, leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs who aren't as analytically driven or knowledgeable about this sort of stuff as you are, what are some things that they can do in their business to be more data driven, more self-aware around some of the results oriented as opposed to just jumping into it?
Sure. I think, look, there's different skill sets in life. My skill set, as I've tried to make clear, is like I'm really good with numbers, right? If you ask me to paint something, it'll look like a kindergartner did it. So every organization should have at least a couple people who have each type of skill set, right?
Mm.
You want some artistic, creative people, but you also want some analytics and mathematics oriented people. So if that is not your skill set as a leader, go hire someone who is. Or if that, even if it's your skill set, but it's not something you're passionate about or you're too busy to do it, go hire someone that is, right? That's why actually, if you look over the last 10 years, one of the hottest like job titles that you've seen in a lot of organizations, both big and small, is data analyst, right? You have these startups who normally would just focus on product and marketing. They're hiring a data analyst as their like fifth employee because they need someone who's all they do is dwell on numbers, figure stuff out, go solve problems analytically. And that's something I really want to emphasize because that didn't used to be important 10 or 20 years ago. Nowadays, because we're so rich in data, and not only are we so rich in data, but people have realized making data-driven decisions matters, that it's become such a hot field. So there, you should go out and hire someone who has this ability. The great thing is there's lots of people who have data analytics as a skill set. In the
Mm.
same way that you would want to hire a marketer quite early on in your business trajectory, you also probably want to hire a data analyst, someone who can just look at data, whether it be in a marketing context or a sales context or an engineering context.
Mm. Tell me a little bit about IdeaScale. So what is it you do? Who do you work with? What's the unique problem that your company solves?
Sure. So IdeaScale is really cool. You can think of us as a social network for ideas. So if you think about Instagram, you're posting photos of your cars, your vacation, and people are liking it, upvoting it, downvoting it, commenting on it. On IdeaScale, you do that, except people post ideas. And ideas could be something as silly as what snacks you want in your office kitchen to, hey, here's a new part for a rocket ship that'll go to space. So and anything that can be an idea, you post on IdeaScale, your colleagues, the general public can vote on those ideas, comment on them, iterate on those ideas. So what we do, we tend to serve large organizations, Pfizer, Comcast, US Post Office, Transportation Safety Authority, both government and private sector. And what we do is we help them do three things. Number one, we help them collect ideas. Okay, good ideas, bad ideas. Number two, we help them sort ideas, which are good, which are bad, which are relevant, which are irrelevant. And number three, we help them turn those ideas into reality. So you can think of it as a social network or database system that does all of these three things really powerfully and in a very social, collaborative way.
So these are internal engines that you're building for companies so that the internal employees would have this board to work from. It's not like a global
Internal, it
social.
could be external. It could be internal, it could be external. For example, some of our customers, I'll use ourselves as an example. So we use our own software. We have an internal board where only our employees can post and comment and stuff. And
Mhm.
that's for like super secret or super controversial like product features that we haven't figured out. And alternatively, we also have a public one where you can go to, you Devo can go to ideas.ideascale.com and you can either post an idea for a new feature we should build or say, hey, you guys have this feature right now, you guys should kill it, or comment on other people's ideas.
Hmm.
And our customers use it that way too. Many of our customers have both a internal version of IdeaScale as well as an external one so that they can engage with the broader world.
So how do you manage proprietary ideas? I guess they're not
Sure. So there,
proprietary, but somebody comes and has this unique idea to change the world. How do you prevent theft around that?
Sure. So that's it comes down to access rights. So if we're doing something very sensitive, we may actually want to restrict it either to our employees or even a subset of our employees. So I'll give an example. As we're thinking about what our big killer features for 2025 should be, we don't want necessarily our competitors or you, Devo, from figuring out what that is going to be until we are ready to, until we built it and are ready to announce it. So that is often only available to our employees. And so we protect IP the same way almost any organization does, which is restricting who has access to see that. And obviously that depends on any organization's context. Most of our features, with the exception of the one or two that we're coming out with, tend to be something we want the public to engage on and give us feedback on or give us ideas for. There's one or two features that I think we're coming out in 2025 that we're like, okay, we want to just discuss this privately and internally with just our employees.
So this is sorry, I just want to break this down a little bit further for people who are listening. It sounds like this is like an incubator whiteboard for organizations to work with you, so you would build something for them so that people can share, collaborate, share ideas, and internally, externally work together to develop something bigger and better than what already exists.
Almost. So we have a pure whiteboard software that's literally a whiteboard, but this is, you can think of it almost like a CRM. In the same way that a CRM, you would say, hey, I'm working on this business opportunity to sell to Microsoft. You can think of it the core object with an idea scale is an idea, and we're not building anything for them. It's software solution. It's a social network. Think of it like Facebook or Instagram that is restricted to a subset of people. So take Instagram, instead of being available to everyone in the world, it is Instagram that's relevant, let's say, to Pfizer's internal customers, Comcast external parties, Nick IdeaScale's employees, or any subset of people that you could imagine. Really, I describe it as a social network for ideas.
I love it. It's a really cool concept. I was checking it out earlier before I got on the show with you, and just I thought I understood what it was, but thank you for clarifying that. I want to switch into sort of a different section for the show. I personally believe that who we are as leaders is part personal, and how we show up as professionally is indicative of how we show up as an individual, right? So if you don't have your house in order, your mindset, your personal, professional, all these sort of things, it's going to have a skewed outcome in how you show up in business, right? And again, one of the core beliefs that I've always had is how you show up as a person defines how you show up as a leader, right? In reading you, you've got this diverse background: battle rap, poker, literature. By the way, did I say this outside of the call? Did I or not? I literally just ordered my collector's edition. I swear to you, the craziest thing of Moby Dick last week. Dude, seriously, I kid you not. I was literally talking to my wife, and I'm like, you know what? I never really fully read through Moby Dick when I was in high school, even though I was required to. And I just love. I recently got turned back onto it. It's like the metaphor for life, right? What Moby Dick really is just a metaphor. I was like, I'm going to order myself a collector's edition. So I just literally bought that book last week. It has not arrived. It's insane that it popped up into my queue. Anyhow, battle rap, literature, Moby Dick. How do these hobbies, these things that you do offline in your personal life, how do these show up in your professional life, and how you think and how you act and how you believe and all the things that make you a personal and professional rounded individual?
Sure. So I think philosophically, me as an individual, I try and only do things I like. There's that old joke: the day you find a job you love is the last day you work. So all of the things that you described, whether it be playing online poker or listening to battle rap or reading the books, these are things that give me joy. I
Mm.
like working at IdeaScale. I like building great products. So number one, philosophically, I only do things in life that I enjoy doing, right? Very few things in life is somebody forcing me to do, right? I actually like washing the dishes, as silly as that is. Actually, a better example is I like
It's
polishing my own
actually quite
shoes.
cathartic washing dishes, to be honest with you, isn't it? I refuse
Exactly,
to
right?
use the dishwasher. I actually enjoy just like it's. I don't know. There's something about it's like in a zone time for me. I do some thinking when I'm in there. I know people think I'm crazy when I say that, so I appreciate you saying it.
No,
Like there's just
exactly.
something about the cleaning of things and the stacking of things and the organizing of things.
Exactly. I love doing it. It's my like morning routine after I feed my son. So I think that's number one, right? I try and only do things in life, both personally and professionally, that give me joy. Where that carries over into kind of my professional life is twofold. Number one, I'm doing a diverse array of things outside of work, which means that I tend to have I think a pretty good respect for the diversity of things that are relevant inside of work. Even though I'm not a particularly artistic person myself, I'm not one of those math people that says art is all BS. No, I in fact appreciate that even though I may not see art as like beautiful, that is a valuable sphere of human life and other people may appreciate. So I think a greater respect for the diversity of things that I may not personally appreciate, but are still relevant to the human experience. The second is an emphasis on continuous learning. So I'm all spending a bunch of time in my personal life learning new things, and I kind of support that. At IdeaScale, we encourage any employee to go take any course they want, and we will pay for it. And we want employees to really continuously grow in their careers, and we want to support them in that. Not only is that good for an individual, but that's also good for the company. And that's something I, again, bring from my personal life because I'm investing so much in my continuing education, even in things that are not ostensibly directly work related.
I have a challenge for you that changed my perspective. And I'm very creative. I love art, but I never really quite understood a lot of art. So over the last few years, I've really jumped into art history, which I don't know if you've ever taken it from that perspective. So instead of appreciating the art for the art, understanding the history behind the art, the perspective, like where did the artist, what was the artist doing in that frame of mind, or what was the mindset behind the painting that they were creating. But I found that it's been phenomenal for me in my critical thought, my understanding of macro, micro, cultural awareness, empathy, creativity, innovation. If you look at some art, especially abstract art, sometimes it just looks like a mumbo jumbo. But then when you start reading about the artist and like their inspiration behind it, it's changed like how I view art now. So anyway, you've said that a couple of times. So I challenge you, being the innovator that you are, look at art from a more art history perspective as opposed to just art and see if that doesn't change your mindset.
That's a good point. I have not looked at art history at all. I look at the statue, and then by the way, there are exceptions, right? There's a few pieces of art I'd be like, that's cool.
What is something that when people hear you say that they're totally taken aback about you as an individual? Maybe something that played a big role in
Yeah.
your success that shaped who you are. Was there something pivotal that happened in early in your life that was altering? Everybody has these moments in their life that just alter the trajectory, right? What were some things in your life that have altered the trajectory? Whether it was a marriage, whether it was a divorce, whether it was a child
Yeah.
being born, whether it was a mentor, are there things like that just completely changed everything for you?
Probably two things. One personal, one professional. Personal is my son was born about 2 months ago, and that's obviously it's my first child.
Life
Thankfully, born
changing.
very healthy, and been a reasonably easy child as far as children go from a sleeping health perspective. But that's obviously changing when you have to get up at 5 in the morning and you have to be responsible for the. It's one thing to be the CEO of a company where you're responsible for people's jobs. It's another thing when you are literally responsible for something, a living creature, not starving to death or not choking or needing to be changed because that's a tremendous level of responsibility. I've had pets for a long time, but pets generally take care of themselves,
Yeah.
right? A human baby is totally helpless for 2 years.
Yeah.
So that has given me just a eye-opening realization in life of the level of kind of moral and human responsibility I have towards
Mm.
this other living creature that I helped create. So that's I think that's a relatively recent occurrence, but that will affect me for decades yet to come. Um, and on a professional level, I think, look, there was an experience in college that was very eye-opening for me. I showed up to college pretty smart, like I was at the top or near the top of my high school, and I show up to a college. And for the first year or so, I'm actually still crushing it. I'm at the top of my class. And then I encounter a couple of individuals that are just truly extraordinarily brilliant at a level that I wasn't born gifted with. And it was eye-opening in the sense that, look, no matter how smart I am, no matter how hard I work, these people were born with this extraordinary gift. And I can't compete against that, but that's okay. When you get past the initial shock that you're not the greatest thing since sliced bread anymore, that is a very eye-opening and humbling experience.
Hmm.
But it not only for as an individual, but it also made me realize, hey, there's this other level of talent. And even if I can't accomplish it, I want to be around other people who have that talent, and I can definitely leverage their talent, even if that's not my skill set in life. And I think that has given me a greater appreciation for, in my career, especially for realizing there's extraordinary talent out there. It's okay. Number one, it's okay that they're better than me. And number two, I want to get them to work with me or work for me, right? That's okay.
Yeah, it is really important the people that you surround yourself with in terms of your mentors, your peers, your competitors, just whatever it is, the type of people that you surround yourself with has been fundamentally the biggest shift that I've made, I would say, in the last 15 years. I noticed in my space that I was generally the smarter person in my group of this or group of that. And I was like the most talented, and masterminds I was joining, I was generally the most experienced. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to grow from this perspective. I have to start finding people who are much more successful than me, much more knowledgeable than me. So I appreciate you saying that. Is there anything in particular that you have ever faced personally as a challenge that fundamentally changed the way you view the world and how you show up?
Oh, that's a hard one, right? I don't think there's any crystallized singular event that has changed my perspective on work or life. I think there's a lot of little experiences that are constantly modifying how I think about either my personal life, my professional life, my career trajectory, and the directions of IdeaScale. I think the answer to your question is simply no. There's not one singular crystal event that like pivoted my entire professional life based on that one occurrence.
I wouldn't say just professional. I think personally or professionally. I think I've had a few, just to give you an example, I've had a few key moments that I've noticed, and I'm just going to use the last 15 years, that changed not only the trajectory of my career and my life and the people that I was surrounding myself with, but just my mindset in general. My divorce was one of them. How I was showing up in relationships was completely skewed and from my perspective, and it was based upon a set of rules and parameters that I had operated from with success up until that point. And when they failed me, I was like, okay, I could either blame my ex-wife, which I did initially, or I could take a hard look at myself and realize that how I was showing up was not ideal. And that altered how I view the world. Perception is reality. I heard the most amazing quote many years ago, and it was, you've heard of Dr. Wayne Dyer?
I have not, no.
It's just he's a kind of a woo scholar guy out there. He's written a bunch of books, but he said if you can change the way you see the world, the way the world changes for you. And I just always thought, I thought that was a phenomenal quote because perception is reality. And if you and I've tested this out. I've gone into a grocery store, for example, and I was rude. I was a bit dismissive. I did this as an experiment, and I didn't dress well. I looked sloppy, and I responded and noted how multiple clerks treated me in that space. They gave me back what I gave them. And then I would leave and I'd come back a few days later, change the way I dressed, looked a little bit more presentable. I was overly gregarious. I was really kind. I was smile. I was complimentary. And it completely changed how the exact same people who didn't remember me changed how they perceived me and in turn how they responded to me. And I've taken that lesson very seriously because again, it is really true and it's altered how I show up in the world. So I'm just curious if there's anything in your life that has changed the way you may have believed something. Maybe your parents taught you that. Maybe you learned that in college. But then in your own experience, something happened that altered how you viewed the world.
Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah,
You don't need to
so
spend too much time on it.
yeah,
I was just curious.
there was a funny experience I had in business school, which was yeah, it definitely changed the way I viewed my world. So the chief human resource officer for one of the biggest companies in the world, top like 20 companies in the world by employees, came to my business school class and talked about how his company interviewed people.
Mm,
And one of the things he said was, "We know that interviews are totally useless."
mm,
Okay, the research shows it. Academic research, their own internal research said that interviews are useless. And then he said, so he says this. He's very confident, he's very honest that interviews are totally useless. And then he said, we still do them.
mm.
And when we asked why, somebody asked why, and I expected him to come back with a response that says there's this other secret reason why they're good. And he's like, because it would be too much of a fight and it's so counterintuitive. So we're just going to continue doing this bad thing. So this was one of the most impressive, successful people in the world running the human resources for a huge company with hundreds of thousands of employees. And he openly is saying, we know this is a bad practice, yet we're going to do it because it is so counterintuitive for us to get rid of this thing that people have been doing for hundreds of years that we're just going to keep on doing it. And I found that was really funny because in my eyes, that's the entire point of having an executive, someone who's going to break common wisdom. But this is someone who's resigned themselves, again, consciously. It's not like they've emotionally given up, that this is just the easier, it's just not the sword they want to die on.
If you were in this individual's shoes and you were charged with the same concept, the same belief, etc., how would you have handled that situation? Knowing that they're useless, knowing that they add
Yeah.
no value, would you continue doing them just for the sake of continuity and not wanting to disrupt the chain?
So I've been fortunate because I've tended to be at smaller, more nimble organizations. We actually have moved away from at each organization I've
Nope.
led. We've
All things being equal, you're him. All things being equal, you as a leader and an innovator, do you disrupt the chain of events because you're data driven and the data says these do not add any value, and you're him, and do you just go along with it because you don't want to disrupt the chain, or do you say, you know what, I'm going to end this age old practice because it adds no fucking value, we're changing the
It's
paradigm?
negative value actually, but there's actually great evidence that it's negative value because you spend all the time interviewing people and then you introduce all your biases and stuff in the process. So I would actually attempt to make the change and I would probably get fired while doing so.
But you'd still take that flack.
I would take that risk because it cuts so if I know something's a bad practice,
Hmm.
I don't do it. It cuts against almost ethically against what I believe in. If I know something is XYZ action is bad, I just can't bring myself to do it.
Yeah, you and
It
me are
like
the
cuts
same.
against me something very deeply to the core.
Yeah, you and me are the same. Philosophically, I could never live with myself. Knowing that I know that it doesn't add any value, I could never continue. I would subtly make micro changes until suddenly it was just indivisible and nobody would understand what just happened. Like the government's doing us today. All right, different topic. Don't get me started. I love this idea conversation around success because success means different things to different people. And it's never a straight line, it's a squiggly line. And every single leader like yourself that I've had on this podcast has a different idea of what this looks like. And they've battled through challenges and they've had highs and they've had lows. And I'm just love the conversation of this space around success. You graduated at the top of your class from Harvard. By the way, that's amazing. And but one of the things I've noticed about you is you've built your career in industries where formal education isn't necessarily required and they don't always predict success. So how do you define what really matters in leadership success as it pertains to your style of managing people?
Sure. For me, success is always been the same, whether when I was a child through now, and probably will be the same for the next 30 or 40 years of my life, which is, am I creating value for my constituents? In
Mm-hmm.
IdeaScale, for example, my constituents, I have three. I have my customers, I have my employees, and I have my shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
Have I, at the end of each day, month, quarter, year, whatever that measurement period is, can I look at myself in the mirror and say, honestly, I created value for all of them? I'm not talking about dividing value and how the pie is cut, but really, did I go out and create
Yeah,
value for them?
for sure.
So, for example, is my product making customers' lives easier? Is it generating enough profits that it pays my employees and generates value for my share or returns for my shareholders? That's a very simple thing. Same thing applies to my personal life, although it's a little bit fuzzy, right? For value for my kid, have I over the next 10 or 15 years given him a healthy, safe environment where he can develop and whatever he wants to as a functioning member of society? I don't think success means, or at least not to me, success is not measured by the number of dollars or accolades. It is looking myself in the mirror and saying, did I create value over the course of my, life or measure whatever measurement period I want to use? And if I haven't, then I failed. Then no accolade or no dollar value matters to me,
Is that
right?
measurable?
Yes.
You feel that that's something you can measure?
Yeah,
I don't.
so
I don't
certainly
disagree.
scale. Yeah, like I can look back and say in 20 years or 25 years, if my son is a well-adjusted member of society, right? If I've given him the all the and I'm excluding like crazy edge cases, but if I've given him a safe, healthy environment, access to education, access to resources, food, water, clothing, shelter, and
Hmm.
he is an adjusted member of society, then I've succeeded. I don't care whether he drops out of college or graduates top of his class from an MIT PhD program. None of that matters as long as my definition of success in child rearing is, are they a well-adjusted member of society?
So he's living in your house still at 60 years old, 50 years old. He's not adding any relevant value to the world. You would still consider that successful?
If he's well-adjusted and well-socialized, yes. That's
Interesting.
economics, whether he chooses to live with me or maybe his goals in life aren't to create value for success. That's okay. His
Uh,
values don't have to be the same as mine. Have I just created somebody or supported the creation of an individual that engages with society in a meaningful way? That's fine.
yeah. I was just having this conversation with somebody yesterday on this whole idea of community and family and how we seem to be falling back into this space of community where families, generational families are living together like they used to many years ago, just out of sheer economics for some reasons. But it's interesting because there is a shift going on. I'm not sure if it's a shift of necessity or in economics or if it's actually a shift of values, which is like families are trying to coagulate again. It's interesting to see where this goes over the next few years. In terms of you as an individual, we all have our strengths and you have many. We all have our weaknesses. I have many. What would you say is some of your biggest weaknesses that you're working on right now as an individual, as a leader, as a father, as a CEO? What are some of the things that you're working to improve upon you?
Sure. Probably like three big weaknesses. I'm terrible at balance. I get obsessive about any one thing, probably disproportionately for short periods of time. And that may be disproportionately obsessed with my son or with work or with programming or with art or whatever that is, right? Probably not with art yet. Maybe I'll try your art history method. I will genuinely try it this weekend because it is a blind spot in my knowledge. So that's number one. I tend to be like obsessive or unbalanced for short periods of time. And that's probably both physically and both personally and professionally unhealthy. Um, Second is, look, as I've said, I'm not the most artistic person. That is a valuable skill set. I know that I'm terrible at that, right? Whether it be in the context of writing or physical art, I tend to be less effective than a lot of other individuals. The third would be at I'm less effective at dealing with introverts than I should be. I'm an
Mm,
extrovert. I love talking to people. I assume that all problems in the world can just be dealt by two adults talking it out rationally.
mm.
Turns out that's not how the world works. Lots of people are
No, it
introverts. Lots of
isn't.
people aren't hyper rational when they're having conversations, and that's ineffective. So my communication style, the one that I like find it very difficult to change, is actually ineffective at probably dealing with one out of every three people on the planet. And
Mm,
so I need to, and I've been working on it for years and decades, but I know I'm actually less effective than the average person at that.
mm. I love that you have some self-awareness around those. I don't think a lot of people spend time on understanding their shortcomings and then willing to put some of the work into it. So I appreciate you saying that. And I think that's a back to the leadership. I think that's a sign for me of a good leader is you're aware of your shortcomings. You have self-awareness around how you show up in the world and the things that you want to improve upon. So kudos to you. In the bigger picture, you're an innovator and the legacy. I love this idea of, and somebody once told me I was vain for having it, but I want to leave. I have a legacy that I want to leave on this planet. I want to know that when I was here and the time that I spent, I was fundamentally able to have an impact on people in a positive capacity that alter the trajectory, whether it's through a conversation, whether it's through my social media, whether it's through this podcast, whether it's through my work with clients. I want to know that at some point I was able to touch your life and make that a more positive experience for you. And that's the legacy I want to leave. That's what I want people to say about me. So when you think about you when it's all said and done, if IdeaScale were to disappear tomorrow or you just faded off into the sunset, what would you want people to remember about what you've built in terms of the business first?
I think I would like people to remember that idea scale did a really good job at trying to create value for everyone, right? We do a good job of, I think we do an extraordinarily good job of making sure we're doing right by our employees, right by our shareholders, and right by our customers. Too many companies only focus on one group at the exclusion of
Mm,
all others. And I think we've done a really good job at balancing those three stakeholders.
mm. What about you as an individual?
For me as an individual, I would like my family to remember that I was a good father and good husband at the end of my life. And that doesn't mean that I made them a bunch of money or left them a trust fund or whatever, but rather, was I a good parent? Did I give them the opportunities to grow? Did I contribute to my marriage, to my children, to my, right, over the course of my life?
Is it more important to you just from a personal professional standpoint on as it pertains to this legacy that your focus is more on the work you do or the people's lives that you touch or something else entirely?
I don't understand the question. Could you rephrase that?
In terms of the legacy, I think I've asked you about professional legacy and I've asked you for IdeaScale and I've asked you about personal legacy. I'm just curious when you think about the two side by side, is it more important to you that you had an impact and left a legacy on the people and the lives that you've interacted with, or professionally the impact you've made in the work that you've done?
Personally, look, at the end of the day, no one remembers very few people remember their boss 30 years from now.
Mm,
Very rarely. Hopefully, my kids remember me 30 years from now. Purely from a proximity or magnitude of impact, it matters much more to me on a personal level because that is much more likely where I'm about to leave a lasting, decades long
yeah,
impact.
yeah. More of a ripple effect, I would imagine. If you had to write your one sentence epitaph, what would it say?
Kind father, husband, and human being.
I like that. Last question. Entrepreneurs listen to this show primarily. If you could give them one piece of advice to think like an innovator, lead like an innovator, become a value driven individual, what would your advice be to them?
Make sure your product or service creates value for your customers. Too many entrepreneurs start a business or start a product or service because it's cool and they haven't really thought about they haven't thought hard about whether their product or service actually is valuable for whoever their end customer is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If it's not, it's a bad business. Nothing you're gonna do in marketing or sales is gonna change that. Your product has to create value for your customers.
And I love that because I say something very similar. I'm like a lot of times we might have a really good idea, but it's only an idea in our own little microcosm. We're not looking at it from what problem we might be solving for other people that are going to use it. So make sure that you vet that out, right? It should always be solution oriented. Man, I really appreciate the time for joining us on the Branding Laboratory.
Thank you so much for having me, Devo. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, I'm glad we finally did this. It was worth the wait.
Perfect.
Where can people find you if they want to connect with you, Nick?
Two best ways. Number one, for the company, our website is IdeaScale.com. Our software, by the way, is completely free for teams or organizations up to 100, literally no strings attached. So I encourage people to check us out. It's not a free trial. Literally, you could use our software forever for free if you are less than 100 people. And number two, if you want to get in touch with me personally, best ways through LinkedIn. My name is Nick Jain. I respond to 100% of messages, so feel free to DM me.
Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.